Hello and welcome back to another Today Years Old video. I'm delighted to be reunited with Hannah after 3 years.
Yeah, 3 years, yeah.
Wow, time has flown. And in that time, Hannah has done some amazing things, including founding the Funding Crowd and becoming one of the top 100 women in FinTech. It's great to be here with Hannah today to talk about starting a startup and how to grow that whilst you've been working full time and doing a PhD. Basically, how to be an entrepreneur without burning out. So Hannah, tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. So 3 years ago, I started the Funding Crowd officially. However, before that, when I was at Sky, I started my PhD part-time in crowdfunding.
Yeah.
So I started learning about crowdfunding at university, started helping a few businesses with it. Found it really fascinating, so started doing research in it, and that just gradually evolved to the point where I was helping businesses run crowdfunding campaigns.
Yeah.
And that really all started in 2016 while I was at Sky. Then in 2018 I kind of formalised it as formalised. Well, I'll work out whether that's a real word later.
That's a word.
I'll look it up later. Yeah. And since then I've been running my business, and then in 2018 I left Sky and started my PhD full time. So it's been a few years of kind of juggling things. But the crux of it is, and I guess the spiel is, that I've run over 50 crowdfunding campaigns, both rewards-based crowdfunding like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and equity-based crowdfunding like Crowdcube and Seedrs, if people are familiar. All of them have been successful.
Wow. And
I've raised about 10 million for early stage startups.
Wow, that's amazing.
Oh, thanks for the wows.
So obviously you started all of this whilst you was at university, and then you had a full-time job and doing a PhD and starting a business. How did you manage to kind of balance your time? How did you find that?
Yeah, so it was hard.
Yeah.
I definitely won't lie, it wasn't a breeze. I think first and foremost, the good thing with Sky, as you know, is that it is flexible working.
Yes.
And I think the culture in my team anyway was really good at supporting people and having interests outside of work. So that meant that I had evenings and weekends to run my business and do my PhD. And again, another benefit was that there was a huge crossover with that. So when I was working with clients, especially at the beginning of my PhD, all that work was part of my research.
Yeah.
So I guess to answer the question, like, how did I manage my time? It was obviously I had to sacrifice certain things. It would be the case that I would be in the office from about 7 a.m, work until like 9 a.m, and then work at Sky, and then stay later.
Yeah.
So I'd be in the office for a long time with maybe 4 hours a day dedicated to things other than Sky. But I have to say, what would help is, particularly the work I was doing at Sky and my PhD work and my business work, so fundamentally different from each other.
Yeah.
So sometimes people say, you know, not that I necessarily advocate this all the time, but sometimes a change is better than a break.
Yeah.
And that's not fully sustainable, but I definitely felt like within that time it made everything a little bit easier.
And did you find that you could kind of manage your work-life balance?
Yeah, so I think definitely sometimes I got it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I wouldn't speak to friends that I should be speaking to, or like go home regularly enough, or call my grandma when I should do.
Yeah.
But thankfully all those people were very patient and kind and understood. It's a case that there were definitely things that I had to sacrifice.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the gym earlier,
Yes.
over lunch.
What's that?
Yeah. So when I was at Sky, I was going to the gym quite a lot, and that built into my routine okay. But when I left Sky and I was doing my PhD and everything was ramping up a little bit, I didn't exercise at all.
Yeah.
So that things just have to be dropped, and I think it isn't something that's even necessarily conscious. I think you just look back and realise, that thing I used to do, I don't do that anymore.
Yeah. When you look down and the trousers are a bit tighter.
So I think ultimately it was realising what my priorities were, and then the things that weren't a priority, they just were either drastically reduced or they were dropped.
Yeah. And I guess if you kind of have made that as a conscious choice as part of your kind of work-life balance, then actually you don't feel guilty about, you know, going for convenience food or not going to the gym
Definitely.
so much.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point actually. I think when I'm sure there are people watching this video that are trying to do loads of things and feeling guilty that maybe even feeling guilty that they're watching this video instead of working. And I think guilt is something that you can't feel too much of.
Yes.
Like you have to, after so many times of not cooking a good meal, instead of keep beating myself up about it, I had to be like, okay, this is something that I can't do.
Yes.
So definitely it's the case, and I think especially when you're striving for success and being successful, I think a big part of that is sometimes setting the bar low on things.
Yeah.
Because energy and time is precious, right? So if you're spending that energy beating yourself up, it's unproductive. Anyone that wants to achieve things and is ambitious naturally has high expectations of themselves.
Yes.
But I think and I definitely haven't got this right, like it's an ongoing process, but I think where you find power is in recognizing your limits.
Yep.
And then pushing them when you need to, but not always trying to push them.
What was the point where you thought, I'm ready to leave Sky now, and this business is mature enough that I'm ready to take that risk?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think first of all I should caveat that the Funding Crowd is a consultancy, which naturally means it was easier to maneuver around things. Yes. I think if you're growing a tech business, or you spoke about an app idea, if you want to grow that, the pace you have to move, the investment you have to get is a very different path. So I think the nature of my business allowed that. But in terms of the point where I made the decision, it was actually less about the business and more about my work at Sky. Now, as I said, no disclaimers here, I said that to you earlier. I think Sky is a great place to work, but I very quickly realised that it wasn't moving me forward to where I wanted to be. And so then it was just the reality of, why am I spending my time or investing my time into something that's not getting me to where I want? So it was a very strategic decision of, if I'm going to get to where I want to, everything I need to be doing needs to align with that.
How did you then take that to being the top 100 women in fintech? That's amazing. I mean, that's such a rapid growth from being in university, corporate world. How did that happen?
I'm not sure. I think being noisy is one thing. I think for my business and getting clients, I had to think about what platforms, social media platforms, online, offline platforms that I had to invest in order to get clients, and LinkedIn was definitely one of those for me. So then I just consistently started talking about crowdfunding, talking about fintech, engaging with other people in the area. So I think I built a reputation online, which definitely helped that. And I highly encourage that wherever field you're in. And then I think, honestly, I just rolled out the credentials, the big, the quantitative figures associated with what I've done helped there. But that took time to build. But in December 2019, I ran a Kickstarter campaign and we raised 25,000. I remember thinking, wow, 25,000, that's amazing. And I was really excited by it. But then in December 2020, I raised 2 million in 2 minutes.
Wow, in 2 minutes?
Yeah, from a campaign.
Wow.
And that progression, now 2 very different companies, 2 very different purposes, lots of caveats to that, but just from looking at my own progress and what, the scale of projects I was working on, that was pretty significant. So, all these things and that progress that I saw helped with that. Yeah.
And obviously, speaking of credentials, doctor is now one of your credentials. So talk me through a bit about your PhD and kind of how your studies have influenced what you do, and talk me through that.
Sure. So I have to say, the PhD in crowdfunding, when people hear that, they're like, why would you do that? And to an extent, I agree. It was the case that it's interesting, you hear these stories of entrepreneurs that say, I've always been entrepreneurial, I was hustling in the playground. That wasn't me. I got an interest in entrepreneurship at the end of university, but my interest in crowdfunding purely came from doing research in it. And then you have to do practical quantitative work as part of that. So I engaged with businesses, and then as soon as I started working with founders and realised that they were the most interesting, visionary, inspirational people, I was like, I want to keep doing this. Ultimately, it was about the only way that this whole thing worked was because I really was interested in it. And I can't emphasize that enough. Honestly, the last year of my PhD, the only thing that kept me going was the title. But my PhD got so hard towards the end, it was really just some cost fallacy that kept me going. So
that's coffee.
So the first 3 years it was passion. And then the last year it was okay, I've done too much now to give up. When
you've had challenges, what sort of challenges have you had, and how have you then overcome those without going, I give up, I can just go back to the 9 to 5?
It's very easy to focus on how far away you feel you are from your goals, but actually looking back on what you've done is a huge amount. So I think that would always keep me on track, less of I need to finish this thing and more I've done a huge amount of work, so let's just keep going. I don't think I've experienced burnout based on what I've heard from people that have experienced burnout. But I definitely have, my mental health has definitely suffered, and since starting my PhD and running my business, it definitely deteriorated. Now I am incredibly cognizant of how my energy changes because of that. So if we talk about like the biggest challenge, it was just going through, just realizing that I wasn't taking the knocks as well as I used to, because knocks come always. So for example, it would be like I submitted my first draft of my thesis to my supervisor and he was like, this is nowhere near ready. And I'd spent, like 6 months writing it. That's a big knock. And I think I've been in situations before where I've taken big knocks like that and been like, okay, keep going, come on, like it's okay. And then final year of my PhD, that happened and I didn't get out of bed for 2 weeks. So I was like, what's the next step? So as for overcoming those things, I think the way, and I think I am now a lot more cognizant of when those feelings are creeping up, because of having gone through that, is you do have to disconnect from the pressure. I think you need to forget that it exists for a bit. You need to give yourself that break. And then when you are ready to approach it again, it's all about doing the smallest, tiniest thing. And one thing that I talk about a lot, both in crowdfunding, because crowdfunding is all about momentum, but in work life in general, momentum is vital. So if you're struggling during the day, I find doing the dishes, making my bed, you start with the smallest thing, which is I'm going to get out of bed. Okay, that's one thing done. I'm going to make my bed. That's another thing done. And then the more you do, the easier the big things become.
I think that's really interesting as well, and actually breaking it down into those individual tasks. Almost that you write a to-do list and the first item is write the to-do list.
Oh yeah, I do it all the time.
You're like, yes, I've done this thing.
Basically every day I do that.
And that feels like a good time to kind of ask you, thinking back over the years, what is the thing you are most proud of doing? You've done so much, but what's the thing that really stands out to you?
Cool. You know what? I don't know. I have to think about this a little bit more. One thing I always talk about when starting a business is you have to know what your why is, like why you've started a business. And my why was always that I wanted to be financially independent without needing a boss, needing a job. And I got to that point at the beginning of 2020, and I think that's what I was most proud of, because that was hard. I mean, there were times when it was baked beans on toast for a few weeks, you know. So that has always been a big thing for me. It was that progression and looking back at those times when I'd be in the office for sometimes 11, 12, 13 hour days for months at a time. And getting, £200 jobs here and there. So going to the point where I can now survive on my own work. I created something that is financially useful. Out of nothing. That's mainly what I'm proud of.
But I think it's important that we celebrate the fact that you are a woman in fintech. And actually, you're a unicorn in that respect, right? There's not that many women in this space. So how did you find being a woman in fintech and kind of some of the challenges in that? And do you think they're unique because you're a woman?
Definitely, I've recognised challenges, some very explicit, some implicit. One thing I remember so my PhD was at the University of Liverpool, and I moved to Liverpool, and there's a financial district in Liverpool that had lots of finance events, and I didn't know anything about finance, but I realised through crowdfunding I was in fintech, so I was like, I probably should go along to these. And I was consistently the youngest in the room and the only woman in the room. And I think what you find is, especially networking events, there'll be groups of men that come from the office together, go to these networking events, have a few drinks together, and they're all in big packs. So I think it was definitely hard for me to get the value of those events, being alone and being a woman and being a very different age. And ultimately, so much is networks driven. Glad to be a woman in this space, and I also support women in this space. So I run a program at Barclays Eagle Labs where I meet 60, 70 founders over the space of a month. And I've noticed a pattern this time where I'll have a woman on a session, and I'll be like, okay, how much are you looking to raise? Tell me about your product. And she'll be like, okay, so we've got a full product, we've got revenue, we're making money, and we're looking for maybe £50,000. And then I'll speak to a man, and they're like, no product, literally nothing, no customers, and we want to raise $1 million. And I'm like, when there's not many people that are like you or you have stuff in common with, it's hard to move with the lubrication that I think men do through the space.
It sounds like you described some imposter syndrome in those networking events. How did you overcome that?
I haven't. And interestingly, I found for a time that I was getting more experience and the imposter syndrome was getting worse.
Yeah.
But I think one thing I saw, actually, I got this from an athlete. I think she's a basketball player. I can't remember her name, but she said like she films herself playing. Not that she can improve, like she does that in training, but she films herself doing amazing stuff, so that every time she feels like she's not good enough, she just watches videos and she's like, yeah, I rule, like I'm amazing.
Wow, that's such a good idea.
Yeah, it's so good. And so I think I'm not a basketball player, and filming myself on my laptop would be significantly less enjoyable. But I think definitely sometimes, like just looking through my LinkedIn profile and just being like, yeah, I did that.
Yes.
It's sometimes what you have to do. But I think the biggest path to overcoming imposter syndrome is reducing reliance on external validation.
Yes.
And it takes a huge amount of time to do that. I think especially as women, we're like encouraged to take external validation.
Yes.
And knowing sometimes, I feel like an imposter today, I don't feel good, that's fine. Like that's okay. And not being annoyed at yourself that you feel that way.
Especially with imposter syndrome, people keep telling you that the way to get over this is to do more networking, and I think that's true to some extent. But I don't think it's the cure. It
was hard for me coming into a space and just graduating, meeting people that have been doing it for 10 years.
Yes.
But actually, that was also a superpower because I was coming in with the most up-to-date relevant knowledge. I knew about things that people 10 years older than me didn't.
Yeah.
So I think a big thing as well is recognizing that yes, there are going to be things you're not going to be as good at as someone else, but everyone inherently, and it sounds a bit like a primary school lecture, but like, we all do have something innately unique about us.
Yes.
And it's understanding what that is and taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because we talk about imposter syndrome as though it's something you have to kind of stamp out and like get over, but actually I really like that idea of you take the thing that's making you feel like an imposter, just take that thing, and instead of trying to get rid of it, it's your superpower. It's your differentiator.
Yeah, for sure. Ultimately, if you're different in some way, someone is going to value that.
Hannah, I could talk to you all day, and it's been such a brilliant conversation. Just to kind of summarise for the people watching at home, what is that one key message you want to give them about how to grow a business in a sustainable way?
Oh, okay. So I think there's so much we've talked about, like putting away guilt, momentum, and all that stuff. And all of them I think are important. But for the one takeaway, I think it is, and something that I'm now very mindful of, is just recognizing how you're feeling about stuff. Now that sounds like really vague, but I think you have to be very honest with yourself when you're doing anything challenging, especially when you're running a business. If I constantly feel uncomfortable in this situation and it's tiring me out, and I think that leads to burnout, then you need to think about how to change that. And to give a practical example, I was spending so long going through LinkedIn messages, emails, and I realised it was like the worst part of my day. So I got a virtual assistant to do that for me, and absolutely transformational. So sometimes it's very practical. Sometimes it's a case of adjusting how you approach things or how you think about it. But it's ultimately the case of when you're doing anything challenging, when you're growing a business, you have to be really mindful of your energy and be honest with yourself. I think as soon as you start kidding yourself, like, yes, I can stay away for 1 more hour, like, yes, I can take on another client, even though there's something in you that's saying, like, I can't do it anymore. Like, listen to that, listen to your body.
Look, Hannah, thank you so much for chatting with me today. It's been such a pleasure to reconnect with you, and congratulations on your hugely successful business. And you've got all this amazing advice, and I know that people at home are really going to benefit from it. So thank you so much for your time.
Very welcome. It's been really fun.
I'll include a link to your Twitter, the Funding Crowd website, and also at the Funding Crowd.
Yes.
And at Dr. Hannah S. Forbes.
Yes, I think so.
Links to everything down below. Go and give Hannah a follow. I don't know if you want people to add you on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Add Hannah on LinkedIn. And of course, if you are thinking of starting your own business, don't forget to go and use the Funding Crowd.
Totally. Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.